Okay, this is Andrew Williams Jr. This is recording the part 3 of our day's celebration of Buffalo Soldiers Day, and we've dealt with many topics. I'm Andrew Williams Jr. This is being co-hosted by the EDFU Foundation, EDFU Foundation.org, and I'm doing this on behalf of, in collaboration with Herschel Daniels, the chairperson of Friends of the African Union, and as I understand it, the African Diaspora Directorate as well. Avon, I have received your email, and I did put into the chat the links. So those of you here, if you so choose, you can click it. Avon, if you're ready now, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll begin to share the information and websites that you presented to me, or I'll follow your instructions. So Avon, please introduce yourself, and let's take it from there.
Good afternoon. My name is Avery Collier from Rochester, New York, president and founder of Friends of the African Union, Smart Wise, a community reinvestment coalition in Monroe County, as well as a youth director for Friends of the African Union and the African Diaspora Directorate. And so we come here today in celebration of Buffalo Soldiers Day, with a special emphasis on the most prominent Buffalo soldier, Colonel Young. And so in doing so, I would speak on that history and of the Buffalo Soldiers in closing. But prior to that, I would like to speak on the work that I have done and will be doing with the UN in celebrating African American history and culture through teaching our youth, as well as our elders, the history that has not been taught to us. And so getting more into my background, I've worked within the UN for the past 6.5 years with Queen Mother as her UN youth representative to the United Nations. I've worked with Herschel going on 7 years now with Friends of the African Union, and through that there's been connections between myself and Mr. Williams, as well as with Mr. Moss, as we discussed in our first meeting in 2016. And so getting right into the topic on the screen share, I would like to talk about how Friends of the African Union and our youth program will be using the United Nations Associations of USA as a platform to help develop and spread our information. The United Nations Association of the United States has a membership program where if you are 25 or younger, you can join for free. And so that means college students, high school students have free access to the United Nations, free access to information and programming through the United Nations Association. And so we can create chapters and clubs to give the opportunity to teach young African Americans throughout the country and abroad our history, our culture, our love, and all we have to offer to the world. And so as you can see, that information is within the benefit package. And so in going forward, using this similar programming infrastructure within the UN, there is the UN UNESCO program, and that is the second topic. And so UNESCO centers, the UN UNESCO Association for Club Centers Associations. So that is a program that is currently going on right now in the Maryland area. And I had the opportunity to speak with Guy Jokin about that program. And they're working to get more people involved with the UN and the SDGs. So that more or less is specific towards that. And that's another program that Friends of the African Union will be working with and developing and incorporating our African history, as well as the African American history, but as well as history from other parts of the diaspora. And then going on to the third topic, I want to discuss the UN Youth. So the UN Youth has created a strategy for a UN Youth 2030. And that agenda we all align with in many ways and avenues. It's just nobody's aware of it. And so one of the things that I will be incorporating in our broad plan is a lot of actions guided with the strategic plan of the UN Youth 2030 agenda. And so I want to get back. And so in saying all that about the work that we're doing in the UN, everybody's doing amazing work and coming together.
Can I come to see him? Okay, so maybe about 12. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
And so coming together right now in celebration of the Buffalo Soldiers, let's speak on how it's a great honor for these men who literally fought for our freedoms, who literally fought for our representation, who literally fought to showcase the best and greatness that African Americans have to offer to this world. And so in doing so, I want to go into telling the story of African Americans at Arlington in the lead up to the Buffalo Soldiers. And going into that story and talking about Arlington, it has to start with the Civil War. And so I'll start it there until I have some history that I will read from some excerpts. So in talking about Arlington Cemetery, obviously we're discussing the land of Robert E. Lee and the land that was taken by the Union Army. And in talking about them, you have to mention the United States Colored Troops. The United States Colored Troops fought in the Civil War, and they represented everything that we wanted. You had to fight for your freedom. And so in doing so, they made a great sacrifice for all before and after them. And so there were 16,000 Civil War soldiers that were buried in Arlington during those turbulent years. Among those many United States colored troops, Blacks who served in the Union Army, were buried in section 23 and 27 of Arlington Cemetery. Their headstones are marked with the Civil War shield and the letters USCT. 3 among these men were Medal of Honor recipients. Although 180,000 Blacks served in the Union forces, less than 100 of them were officers. And that speaks to the foundation that was set for our freedom and where we are today, where those soldiers that fought in the Union Army for their freedom and that are buried on Arlington Cemetery. And so in going and telling that story, it leads to the Buffalo Soldiers and leads to the story of Colonel Young. And Colonel Young's story goes all the way up until World War I, prior to his retirement. And Colonel Young was the highest ranking Black officer and the first Black officer to reach the rankings of colonel. And he's buried in section 3 of Arlington Cemetery. And one of the things that really stands out about him is not only his military career and perseverance, but his retirement. And so there's much controversy surrounding his medical retirement, who Colonel Young, obviously being the third Black graduate from West Point, and he protested his forced retirement, and he rode his favorite horse from Ohio all the way to Washington D.C. to prove his stamina and apparel for reinstatement. Many people felt he was forced to retire to prevent his eventual promotion to general officer during wartime expansion. Colonel Young was not reinstated until a few days before the war ended, and then he died a couple of years following in 1922. And I know Mike has a much more extensive history to tell about Colonel Young, but I wanted to speak on him and his history as it goes on to Arlington Cemetery, and in that location, um, it represents everything that America is and what we fight for. It is a place that I've worked for several years. It's a place where I've mourned uh, folks that I've known that passed away via suicide. I know two soldiers that were buried there that I worked with that committed suicide. Um, and so it's hollow ground for me and something that I felt is sacred. And so working at that location, I got to experience the history of Black folks buried at Arlington, from Medgar Evers, from Colonel Young, to Thurgood Marshall, to heavyweight champ Joe Louis, um, uh, to Marvin Wiltfield, who was an Olympian, and Tuskegee Airmen. So the list goes on of prominent African Americans that we can discuss, and our history is there. Our history is there, and our history should be respected. It should be proud. It should be acknowledged. And I think what we're doing today in establishing uh, uh, Buffalo Soldiers Day and making this proclamation uh, through this stream is we're opening the door to broaden that conversation. And I think Arlington Cemetery is definitely a great place to start the conversation with Kennedy being there, with Native Americans being buried there, with Jewish Americans being buried there. Everybody who fought for American freedoms are buried there. It is an integrated cemetery. And so I think that story, not only saying the African American story, but saying all the stories of color and prominence at the cemetery, showcase what we truly are as ideas that come together and work and strive for a better tomorrow. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to put forth and acknowledge today during Buffalo Soldiers Day, and Colonel Young being buried at Arlington Cemetery, is that where we're stepping forward. And I don't know if you've seen any of those pictures, but that was his funeral service at the Memorial Amphitheater. And I think was just about 5,000 folks showed up. And so usually the only time that amphitheater fills up is when the president comes. And I've been there during Memorial Day and Veterans Day multiple times when President Obama came through. And I can see in the pictures, Colonel Young garnered the same respect, the same crowd. So that says a lot about his character and what he meant to the people during his time. And what he means today. In that last photo, if you can show that one, there's a couple brothers in the purple and orange. They're Omega Men, and that shows that he's still connected today to our youth. Through the Omega Sci-Fi fraternity, and that I know who that is just by color and association. Q Dogs, but that's something that we have to you know, we also can work in concert in association with that fraternity and showcasing and raising more awareness on Buffalo Soldiers Day of Colonel Young, who was a part of their fraternity and one of the original members when he joined. So I think that's, you know, things that we're working on and galvanizing the youth and promoting their involvement in making a better future for Blacks within the diaspora. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. One question, the college that Colonel Young attended, what college was that? You said these are alumni of that college?
Who?
Colonel Young, you said he was an alumni of the college, same college that these youngsters were.
No,
here?
alumni of the same fraternity, Omega Psi Phi.
Okay.
That fraternity was founded at Howard University and was the first Black fraternity founded at a historical Black college. I'm not sure what their full name is, but the Alphas was the first Black fraternity, and that was founded in Cornell University. I think about 4 or 5 years prior to the Omega Psi Phi fraternity in Howard.
Okay, that provided the answer. So just as a footnote, Howard University was also a contributor to the Sustainable Development Goals Network that just produced a study earlier this year. As a matter of fact, it was released on June 21st at the United Nations Global Compact Leaders Summit. And it indicated that here in the United States, it's the indigenous, the Latinx, and the African Americans that are the least served of the objective of trying to accomplish the Sustainable Development Goals here in the United States. In fact, of all the 50 states, none of them are even 50% along the way of acknowledging or accomplishing the Sustainable Development Goals. Sorry, I have a national alert here, or a city alert. But Abram, thank you so much. Let me open the floor to any questions or comments. I'll open the floor for any questions or comments.
Hello. Yes, I have a comment. Yes. Okay. And my comment is this: it's a little known fact in history that the first Black troops to engage uniformed Confederate troops were the Blacks with what's called the Loyal Indians. And that was in November and December of 1861. And they were with under a Creek leader named Opaslo Yahola. They became known as the Loyal Indians, but they were Black interpreters. I had 3 direct ancestors there, and they were communicating with Lincoln, but he wouldn't come back and help them. And then when they went into Kansas, they were the first Indian Home Guard. And that they were, it was tri-racial, white officers, Indian troops, and Black interpreters. And when the states were able to create military units, they became the 1st and 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry, very famous for the battles they fought. And finally, coming out of that, they became the 79th and 83rd U.S. colored troops. U.S. Colored troops. That's it.
Well, that's important, and that's very relevant. So I really thank you for sharing.
One more important thing. I got to get this in. It's only one statement.
No one is limiting you except yourself.
Okay, well, thank you. And you hear about the Trail of Tears, but when those Indians and when those Black who would be the interpreters, were fighting against the Confederate troops and their allied Indians, because all 5 civilized tribes broke their treaties with the Union and joined treaties with the Confederacy. And if it wasn't for the loyal Indians, they wouldn't have even got their land back. Because the loyal Indians got them a place at the table. But in that last battle in Indian territory, they were ran off from their supplies, and that is known as the Trail of Blood on Ice. We remember the Trail of Blood on Ice, where we had to run naked through the snow to get out of Oklahoma Indian Territory and go into Kansas. So this Trail of Tears and that sadness and all of that, no, think also about the Trail of Blood on Ice, where the Blacks and Indians were fighting, and they got ran off from there, and they still didn't give up. They went over into Kansas. So I'm done.
Okay, the floor is open for any any further questions or comments?
Well, I just to throw this out there on Colonel Young, I want to try to keep the topic on the Buffalo Soldiers. I mentioned Obama visited Arlington Cemetery in that amphitheater for a wreath-laying ceremony on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. What I didn't know was that his burial and his wreath-laying on Memorial Day was the origination of that procedure, which became a tradition of the president to lay that wreath. So I think that's quite interesting, to the love that was shown for the highest ranking Black officer became a ceremony and honored by the president. And I think it might have been in slight or to take attention away that so many people were showing up for a Black man that the president had to maybe hijack it during that time to promote all soldiers at the Tomb of the Unknown. But I think that's quite interesting and something I definitely want to look more into.
Yeah, I have a comment. I have another comment. And great presentation. And I should have included that when those first Indian Home Guard Blacks became 79th and 83rd United States Colored Troops, they became part of the original Buffalo Soldiers that was formed in 1866. So it all ties together. But I respect your desire to keep it focused on. But the problem is, maybe you didn't know that there was a segment that came from the USCT, or if not you, I think you knew other people. The U.S. Colored Troops offered already trained veterans to the original 1866 Buffalo Soldiers, and even some of the white officers was from the USCT. I'm done.
Perhaps. Thank you. The floor is open for any other comments or questions.
And something I just want to throw out there for conversation, because we mentioned, I think I may have mentioned this yesterday or the day before, but we speak on reparations. And so what would be the remedy for officers like Colonel Young and prior to him that were maybe enlisted or ranked as officers, but paid as enlisted soldiers, or paid less than their common officers? So should we create a study on that, or look into that? Maybe those families of people that served should receive some benefits in some way?
Well, I guess the person that asked that would be one of the descendants of Colonel Young, whom I believe you know.
Not familiar. I think Mr. Harris.
Oh, yes, Mr. Harris, yes. So the short answer is, again, from my perspective, of course, yes. But even more specifically, there are multiple reparation committees, commissions, particularly here in California, even the city of Los Angeles. But again, the short answer is yes. But then the question becomes, who should undertake that study? And perhaps it should be Howard University, since that was a place where the fraternity of which Colonel Young was an alumni was founded.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's something we maybe should put in writing, that and get the backing of the Young families.
Well, I recommend that Admiral, that we do what we're supposed to, which is take well, in the first place, let me take a step backwards. Everything we're talking about here deals with human rights, regardless of race, creed, or color. It's human rights. And there are 30 human rights that were acknowledged in the 1948 Declaration on Human Rights. 29 is responsibility. So Everin, you must take responsibility for putting pen to paper, at least starting a paper trail, because everything moves by paper. So I would say yes, yes, and yes. Let's do it together. John, thank you for your input into the chat. But in every case, when you put a link, please type the text for what you're referencing. But perhaps you could let us know what the link is to. John Moss.
Sure. Sorry. Yes, that text is to reference video, supposed to be, of YouTube on the Buffalo Soldier, and partly how the Cheyenne gave them and they recognized their name for their fierce warriorship, if you will, and the Buffalo Soldiers' hair similar to the buffalo, as well as the Buffalo Soldiers were forced to fight the most fierce battles and for fierce weather, and many of them, with their respect of the Native Americans, started wearing jackets made out of buffalo hide to help them in those conditions, just as our Native American people did. So that's what that video is, and it's from YouTube, and I don't know how to share the link, but if anyone wants to email me, there's how to find out your tribal membership link that I can give you kind of a guide, but I don't know how to put it into the space here, sorry. But the other is that BIA.gov lists all the tribes. So if you were looking at a particular band or whatever and wanted to look into it, you'd go to the enrollment department. But that's just a starting point. I was trying to do it quietly so I wouldn't interrupt. Sorry.
No worries. No worries. As a matter of fact, Herschel just called. He may be joining us soon. It's 11:11 now. I'm expecting by 11:30 that Michael may join us. But in the meantime, the link that you shared is about 30 minutes long. So unless there are any further questions, I'm going to share that video and give us time to get ready for the next segment. So unless there are any questions, I'm going to share that video now. Okay, hold on just a moment, please. Let's see here.
I think we have to partially view a commercial for a little bit.
But we'll get over it. As you can see, the video is kind of slow, but the link actually does go to it. So for those that are here, if you want, you can also access it. Bear with me or bear with us.
That's too bad because it is a good link, but I just wanted to share it. If it works, great.
Yeah, that's fine. In the meantime, we are here, so we'll roll with the punches. Again, I have about 15 minutes to wait before 11:30, so bear with us.
Andrew, sir? Andrew?
I can hear you, John. I just have internet
Okay,
challenges.
no, I just have a question. While that's coming up, oh, it looks like maybe it's there.
No.
I can hear you in the meantime while it's still cycling.
I was just gonna say is related to events, perhaps Ms. Kenya Cox, who's now joined us, can update us a little bit on the Nicodemus event coming up. And part of that
Begins a story of heroism and devotion to duty that you were never taught in school. It begins and ends here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, with the dedication of this monument to a name that stirs a faint sense of recognition, a slight jarring in some remote corner of the mind. The story of a faithful band of brothers who gloried in the name given to them by the very enemies they fought, the Buffalo Soldiers.
The short answer, John, yes, I did see Ms. Cox come in. So if we're unable to get this done, then perhaps she could introduce herself. But I'm going to give this about
The Buffalo Soldiers. Thousands from across the country make the pilgrimage to Kansas to hear an address by the man whose dream sparked this dedication more than 10 years ago.
General Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
America's highest-ranking officer, here to honor a group of men that no one knows. Nameless, faceless ghosts from the mists of frontier history. Until now. During the Civil War, they were called the U.S. Colored Troops. Nearly 180,000 fought for the Union. 33,000 died. Thousands more fought for the South. But now the war was over. Many drifted west to become farmers, cowboys, settlers. In 1866, the new standing army announced some startling additions. 2 regiments of cavalry, 2 of infantry, all black troops with white officers.
For most of those guys, it was a dream come true. No more cotton fields, no more factories. 13 hard cash dollars every month. Regular meals, a uniform. A chance to be somebody.
Pushed into a dark corner of our past, exactly 100 years went by before their story was told. In 1967, Dr. William Leckie wrote the first and still the definitive history of the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the Buffalo Soldiers.
One thing that I don't believe many people realize. That we only had 10 regiments of cavalry. 2 of those regiments were black. That's 20%. That's 1 cavalryman in 5 is black. They spent from 1867 to 1891 in efforts to bring peace and order on a frontier that stretched from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, from the Rocky Mountains to the Prairie Plains. And they were the principal line of defense in a huge, huge, huge area. The tragedy is they never got any credit for it.
As the glamour outfits, the cavalry took the forefront. 2 of the Army's best officers were assigned to command. Colonel Edward Hatch, the 9th Cavalry, and Colonel Benjamin Grierson took the job of organizing the 10th Regiment. The problems were many. Untrained, mostly illiterate ex-slaves, and no officers to train them. Assignment to a black unit was not perceived as a career-enhancing move.
The troopers knew it too. Here's an ad in the Army-Navy Journal. A first lieutenant of infantry stationed at a very desirable post desires a transfer with an officer of the same grade on equal terms if in a white regiment. But if in a colored regiment, a reasonable bonus would be expected. Even General Custer said no thanks. I don't want to serve with no brunettes. That's what he called us, brunettes. We've been called worse.
But the Great Plains were under siege. Comanches, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho warriors struck all across Kansas and Indian Territory. In the summer of 1867, Colonel Grierson and his raw recruits of the 10th Cavalry rode into battle. Their job? To protect workers building the Kansas Pacific Railroad. The first public mention of these new troops in combat came in the September 7, 1867 issue of Harper's Weekly, dateline Fort Harker, Kansas. Quote, "A few months since, you could not have convinced a ranchman that there was any fight in the colored troops. It is different now. I've not met a single frontiersman who has seen the dusky patriots go for the Indians, but be loud in their praise. Why, quoth one of them the other day, 'Plague my cats if they don't like it.'" After this first successful fight, the sergeant in charge turned in this report.
"Me and the boys, we done all bully except Corporal Johnson. He flinked. And the way he flinked was to stay back till we had run the engines about 2 miles. Then he come hollering, 'Get at 'em, get at 'em.' Now me and the boys just think anybody that flinked like that ought to have no corporal strike."
The tradition of pride in the regiment and the took great pride in their new nickname. For its origin, we return to Dr. Leckie.
The Cheyennes saw a resemblance between the hair of that black trooper and the buffalo. It was meant as a compliment. That black trooper understood it. He not only liked it, he was proud of it. I interviewed some old Kiowa and Comanche Indians in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And I asked several of them about the origin of the term buffalo, so they confirmed what I just told you. And said, but boy, they were fighters.
In later years, the cavalrymen adopted the animal as part of their regimental insignia. They were officially buffalo soldiers. The area on which this magnificent monument stands was not a random choice. Much deeper significance was involved in the final selection. This is sculptor Eddie Dixon.
The original site was a parade ground. I spoke with an elderly woman that lived in the Fort Leavenworth area that she was a reservoir of history. The area that she thought the soldiers should be placed was in an area near the river. In the earlier part of the history of Fort Leavenworth, this area was very swamp-like. It was a bog area. And the black soldiers weren't allowed to live up on the higher grounds or in the barracks in which they built for the white soldiers. And she stated that many soldiers died down there, many soldiers became very ill. And I selected that site because I thought the key word to everything that she had given me, I thought the key to it was the souls of those men are still there. So what would be a better site to place this sculpture than where the souls were still restless, moving around? So now I think they will be at ease and at rest.
While Grierson and the 10th handled the plains, Colonel Hatch and the 9th Cavalry were ordered to Texas. Indians, Comancheros, rustlers, and Mexican bandits were their foes. Sun, sand, and scorpions, their daily companions. And like the 10th, the 9th Cavalrymen had one more enemy: prejudice, by the very people they were risking their lives to defend.
In those days, Texans didn't take kindly to Yanks in uniform. And that went double for blue suits on black troopers.
In the little tough towns that developed around these military posts, a black trooper didn't have to look for trouble. When he went to town, it was waiting for him.
In 1877, one such incident occurred outside Fort Concho in the rough and tumble town of San Angelo, now San Angelo, Texas. A group of cowboys and hunters confronted a sergeant, cut off his chevrons, the stripes from his trousers, and generally humiliated him. Back at the barracks, troopers hearing the story grabbed their weapons and headed back to the saloon. A massive shootout ensued, killing one Buffalo soldier and one of the townspeople. There were reprisals, but the cavalry troopers had made their point. That scene would be repeated many times in the frontier world of the troopers. An ironic footnote. In Indian Territory, the 9th Cavalry was there to protect the 5 so-called civilized tribes against invasions by less domestic Indians. The 5 tribes were mainly successful farmers, aided greatly by their custom of keeping black slaves. These photographs constitute the largest single accumulation of Buffalo Soldier images ever assembled. The result of nearly 20 years of research by Dr. John Langelier, author and military historian. Many have never been published, and they are totally unique.
The fact is, these photographs took so long to assemble because they're scattered throughout the country in small historical societies and agencies and sometimes larger collections in private hands. They're extremely rare. The rarity comes from a number of factors, not the least of which is the fact that the soldiers themselves were stationed at remote outposts in many instances and had no access to photographers. In other cases, the soldiers had no real tradition of having their photographs taken. During the days of slavery, this was not an option that they had available to them. Cut off from family and friends in the past, the barracks became their home, their comrades, their family, or their adopted family. Thus, there was no need to have a photo taken for that reason. Finally, these photos that do exist many times don't even have names associated with them. They're anonymous today, and yet they tell us so much. They are the only documents we have. Unlike other time periods, say the Civil War or even the Spanish-American War, when we have a number of letters and even diary accounts from black troops who had served in those engagements, nothing has survived from the enlisted men's point of view, written by the soldiers themselves, that we can really piece together and get an individual idea of who they are. We also will find that within these photographs, the soldiers themselves were proving something, not to themselves. They had no reason to do that. They knew they were professionals, serving faithfully and with valor. They didn't have to prove that to their comrades either. And yet they had a certain sense that somehow seems to come through when we look at these individual images of the men that said, we know who we are. We want others to know, not only other African Americans, want the nation as a whole to know that we are proud soldiers, that we are capable professionals. That's what those photographs are. That's why they're so important to us. And that's unfortunately why they're so rare.
A detailed exploration of the black military experience on the frontier is difficult, but Fort Davis, Texas provides a microcosm, an isolated universe, one of the many homes of the Buffalo Soldiers. At varying times, both regiments of cavalry and the infantry operated from Fort Davis. And while the cavalry spent most of its time in pursuit of marauding Apaches, Comanches, Comancheros, and bandits, to the infantry fell the less glamorous jobs: staffing the garrison, maintaining roads, guarding the stagecoach line, erecting the telegraph systems. More than 100 years later, mute evidence of their passing remains. The ruts of the Butterfield stage still mark the desert landscape. Stumps of telegraph poles placed by the black troopers jut from the sand. And at this important waterhole, the Tinaja de las Palmas, a battle which helped end the Apache wars in Texas took place. Digging into the sand above these rock tanks sometimes produced enough water to stay alive. Convinced that Victorio and his warriors would cross the Rio Grande for yet another murderous raid, Colonel Grierson set a trap. His troopers spread dangerously thin by constant patrols. Grierson stationed guards at every waterhole 30 to 50 miles apart. Here in the shadow of the Eagle Mountains, Grierson, his teenage son, and 9 men of the 10th Cavalry waited and watched. Victoria, with nearly 100 warriors now desperate for water, entered the valley. Alarmed by the numbers, Grierson sent for reinforcements, and the battle was joined. The stone barricades erected by the troopers still stand exactly as they were in 1882. Fred Moore, a local rancher and historian, discovered the battle site some years ago.
I picked up about 3 or 4 spent cottages in this area along the wall here, and I found one cottage, live cottage, that hadn't been fired at 4570, so apparently they were held up here, but they didn't do too much firing from this angle because there's some 300 to 400 yards over there before the Indians were ported up on that little peak over there. Now I did find quite a few empty shells, spent shells along that ridge over there, and I presume they were from the Indians' gun, because according to Grierson's report, was when the Indians spied Grierson and his troops up here on the hill, while they turned south to try to miss the troops and go south of the stage line, and that's when the troopers took after them over there, and the Indians forded up on that ridge over there. So that accounts for the spent shells over there, I'm sure. And as I said, that's the only ones that I found here. And then on the point up there where Grierson actually was on top, I didn't find anything up there in the way of ammunition or shells or anything. So apparently they didn't fire from up there on account of the distance.
After several hours, Victoria retreated north to Rattlesnake Springs, where another buffalo contingent lay in wait. The Apaches were forced back into Mexico, where the war chief was killed in a battle with the Federales. The Apache threat to southwest Texas was over. The United States Military Academy, West Point, New York. The grim expressions on the faces of these cadets are the kind that greeted new cadet Henry O. Flipper when he arrived. Flipper, the first black American ever to graduate from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, was a symbol to the entire black population.
He was from Atlanta, and his folks was ex-slaves. When Flipper graduated from West Point in 1877, he was our Jackie Robinson, Joe Louis, and Ralph Bunch all rolled into one. He took the silent treatment at school for 4 years and made it. He proved that we could do it, but we was just like everybody else.
It lasted 5 years. At Fort Davis, Flipper was accused of embezzling regimental funds. Contemporary reports suggest that his biggest crime was going riding with a white lady from the nearby town. Unlike accused white officers who were always confined to their quarters, Flipper was locked up in this guardhouse. The court-martial took place here in the Post Chapel. These are the ruins of the Post Chapel today. This is how it appeared during the court-martial. The verdict was guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer, and Flipper was given a dishonorable discharge, an excessive sentence which for white officers usually brought a brief suspension and loss of pay. Flipper would devote the rest of his life in attempting to overturn the court.
Then, just a few years later, another man made it to West Point. John Hanks Alexander of Arkansas, whose parents had also been slaves, graduated in the class of 1887. Duty with the 9th Cavalry. Then, while assigned to Wilberforce University, he died of heart disease.
In all, only 3 black Americans in the 19th century graduated from West Point. Charles Young, whose family had moved north from Kentucky after the Civil War, was an outstanding student. He graduated in the class of 1889.
When he was still with the 9th, Lieutenant Young volunteered to tutor an ambitious sergeant who wanted to earn a commission. He got that commission and then some. That sergeant was Benjamin O. Davis Sr. In 1940, he was the first black soldier ever to wear the Star of a General.
And that family's tradition continued. In 1936, Benjamin O. Davis Jr. became the first black graduate of West Point in more than 50 years, following the very man who had tutored his father. Davis Jr., one of World War II's famous Tuskegee Airmen, retired from the U.S. Air Force in 1970, a lieutenant general. Unique to the Buffalo Soldier regiments was the appointment of a regimental chaplain. In addition to their spiritual duties, the education of the troops, many of whom were illiterate, was a primary function. In 1884, Henry V. Plummer became the first black chaplain in the regular army. His assignment, Fort Riley, Kansas, the 9th Cavalry. Within a few years, he had established himself as a role model to the troopers. But, like Lieutenant Flipper before him, he fell victim to prejudice. He was court-martialed and dismissed from the Army. One of the charges? Fraternizing with enlisted men. In 1886, Allen Allensworth, a Civil War veteran who as a slave had taught himself the forbidden arts of reading and writing, became the second black chaplain. He would spend the next 2 decades with the black troopers as one of the Army's most innovative and devoted educators. At Fort Bayard, New Mexico, Allensworth wrote a manual which was to set the standard course of studies for the common soldier throughout the Army. His success led to the appointment of 3 more black chaplains, William T. Anderson, Theophilus G. Stewart, and George W. Perlow. Allensworth retired in 1906 as a lieutenant colonel, the highest-ranking black officer of his day. Formal education was important, but fighting was the primary duty of the Buffalo Soldiers. Dr. Monroe Billington, author of New Mexico's Buffalo Soldiers.
In the years following the Civil War, the territory of New Mexico had 16 military installations. At 11 of those, black soldiers served at one time or another between 1866 and 1900. Those men were out here for a specific purpose. Their primary job was to pacify the Indians, to make New Mexico territory a place to live in, safe for whites and Hispanics and other peoples who wanted to come out to this country. And while there were some white soldiers in New Mexico as well as blacks, there's no question that the blacks made a significant contribution in this area. Pacification of the Indians, their #1 goal. And they spent a great deal of time working at that, some of them losing their lives, others spending time doing other things when they were not chasing Indians, but to help the others do their jobs. And in that regard, these soldiers made a significant contribution to the settlement of New Mexico. The black soldiers in New Mexico were not only interested in the Indians, nor was all the violence with which they were associated did it have to do with the Indians. The Army was also used for pacifying civil disturbances, as well as the Indians. And it turns out that the black soldiers in New Mexico played an important role in New Mexico's most famous series of events. That's the Lincoln County War in the late 1870s. And the black soldiers were brought in by the colonel at Fort Stanton near Lincoln, New Mexico. And there, by coming down on one side or the other, he was able to bring the Lincoln County War to an end. Most people know that he played a role in it. They do not know that black soldiers were those who backed him up. And so the black soldiers played a role in pacifying New Mexico in purposes of the white population as well.
The 9th Cavalry was making itself known in New Mexico. This badly faded tintype is our only link with this historic moment.
Sergeant Thomas Shaw from Covington, Kentucky, for meritorious courage under fire. The highest decoration the country could award, the Medal of Honor.
No pictorial record remains to show Sergeant George Jordan from Williamson County, Tennessee, in the same action with Shaw, the Medal of Honor. Sergeant John Denny from Big Flats, New York, Los Animas Canyon, New Mexico, 1879, for removing a wounded comrade to a place of safety while under heavy fire, the Medal of Honor. Sergeant Brent Woods, a farmer from Pulaski County, Kentucky, in Gavilan Canyon, New Mexico, the Medal of Honor.
The cavalry and some civilians were trapped. Their officer was killed. Old Woods took command. They said it was his energy and skill that defeated the Indians and saved the detachment from a massacre. He was some soldier. But then he got busted down to private. But they never did try to take that Medal of Honor.
The 24th and 25th Infantry would spend 11 years in the frontier wilderness of Texas, stretched thin along a border hundreds of miles long. Forts Davis, Stockton, Quitman, McCavitt, and Clark. They built the roads, the forts, the telegraph lines, guarded wagon trains, and stagecoaches. In the early years, the 9th Cavalry would join them at Davis and Stockton. This was raw, remote, violent land, a threshold of American civilization. Indians, bandits, and Mexican revolutionaries raided, robbed, and murdered almost at will. The Buffalo Soldiers were the settlers' only hope for protection. The 10th Cavalry began its history in Kansas. Organized at Fort Leavenworth, they would spread across the plains at Fort Harker, Fort Hays, Fort Larned. Their war was a different one. Marauding Cheyenne and Kiowa, considered by many officers to be the finest light cavalry in the world, were the masters of the plains. The ill-equipped and hastily trained Buffalo Soldiers would prove to be their equal and more. One of the most valued documents of the Buffalo Soldier period is the journal kept by Sergeant Horace Bivens, shown here with his dog Booth. The son of a farmer in Virginia, Bivens attended Hampton School, and quoting his journal, "Having a very great desire for adventure and to see the Wild West, I joined the United States Army. Assignment, the 10th Cavalry, Fort Grant, Arizona Territory, and his final station, Fort Apache." The Indian War in the Southwest was nearly over, but Bivens still had his taste of adventure. Chasing hostiles, patrolling roads and reservations, and protecting settlers was a full-time job. Bivens West was still wild. His interest in marksmanship led to his eventual reputation as one of the best shots in the Army, and the medals on his uniform attest to his skill. An officer of the 10th wrote to Washington requesting a better duty station for the regiment after nearly 20 years in the desert. He suggested somewhere closer to civilization, like Kansas. And the regiment was transferred to Montana. They arrived during a blizzard at 20 below zero. They would remain there until the war with Spain. The 9th Cavalry would also be transferred to the northern plains. In 1890, patrols from the 9th were searching for Chief Bigfoot and his band of Sioux when the 7th Cavalry encountered them at Wounded Knee. The day after that battle, the 7th was trapped by another band of warriors. Outnumbered and facing annihilation, they sent for help. A forced march of over 100 miles in a single day brought the 9th Cavalry to the rescue. Custer's former regiment, saved by the very men he had declined to serve with, the Buffalo Soldiers. That battle earned the final Medal of Honor for the 9th Cavalry. It went to Corporal William O. Wilson for bravery. During their years on the frontier, 12 men of the 9th earned the coveted medal. And sadly, no pictures exist for most of them. Sergeant Emmanuel Stantz, Corporal Clinton Greaves, Sergeant Thomas Boyne, Sergeant John Denny, Sergeant George Jordan, Sergeant Henry Johnson, Sergeant Thomas Shaw, First Sergeant Moses Williams, Sergeant Brent Woods, Sergeant William McBriar, Corporal William O. Wilson, Private Augustus Wally. The last man on this list, Augustus Wally, was one of the first Buffalo Soldiers. He retired after 30 years of combat service.
Send me off, go and feed. No, me and a rat, but me, I go there for the cheese. So that up on my back, and you know them off to eat. So don't test me kill the blood clean. You hear me? Send me off, go and feed. No, me and a rat, but me, I go there for the cheese. So that up on my back, and you know them off
That's
to
the end of
eat.
the video. The rest is this little commercial.
Okay, thanks for letting us know. Hold on. Okay, John, well, thank you so much for sharing that link, and I hope our audience had a chance to enjoy it. We should be hearing from Herschel Daniels shortly, but we have had a couple of people join us. Bernice, thank you so much. Ms. Young, thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, now's that time. If you so choose.
Ms. Atchison, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I finally figured it out. I have been working all the morning trying to get my internet up. I'm Bernice Atchison, African American Agriculturist Association, Black Farmer, Class B of the Pickfoot Legacy Farmers. I am FAU Smart Wise Reinvestment Coalition President of Chilton County, and I am an advocate for our peoples, trying to help our society to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And you're also a member of at the World Conference of Mayors. That's you up on stage to the right of Mr. Mohammed Robala and other mayors up there. So thank you for attending.
Thank you.
The farmers there as well. Yes. And I know you were in you're in Oklahoma as well.
Yes, yes.
With the Tuskegee Airmen. So thank you.
Yeah, I was appointed by George C. Wallace, who was supposed to be one of the most prejudiced governors there were. But we were able to forge a friendship and work together for the good of the people.
That's important. Very important. It looks as though we'll be graced by Mr. Herschel Daniels, who's coming in as we speak. He's connected now. So I'm going to stop recording and start recording again.